Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 28 wildcard, and I'll be looking at creating two sorts of overlying draft structures for two sorts of players. The players who have free hits remaining, and I'll be advocating for a specific week to free hit in, which is going to be 32, and I'll be discussing that in just a second. And then also another wildcard line, which is for those of you who do not have a free hit remaining and are either in the camp of having a bench boost left, where I would advise, of course, playing it on 29, or if you have no chips remaining but simply just want to go for a wild card this week to tackle the fixtures ahead, like Game Week 29, of course. So my chip strategy, I would say, is going to incorporate the same front line because I feel like this is the right time to go out of Haaland. Yes, of course, he scored 5 goals and he scored versus Red Bull Leipzig, which is actually a very top team in Bundesliga. But I have to say that this is a good week to go off of Haaland, and most of your decisions in terms of the players that you're going to leave on your team that blank on Game Week 28 will have a double in Game Week 29. So that's my argument for why Haaland will not feature in this drafts. However, what am I showing you guys right now? It's actually the fixture schedule for FPL, but the key week that I really wanted to cover on is Game Week 32 and also specifically looking at Arsenal. So I plan on free hitting on 32 if I have the chip strategy that I'd like to pursue. I think it just makes the most sense because Chelsea and United have some great fixtures with exception to Game Week 32. So you need to look at if you can adopt these United assets and these Chelsea assets who, first of all, double on Game Week 29 and then have good doubles after that, potentially on 34 as well, then what is the team that you have to leave out whilst incorporating these assets? Keep in mind, of course, as well, that Brighton assets and Newcastle assets will also have a lot of doubles during this period, which means that compared to a team like Arsenal that have single game weeks, they might be a little bit stronger. Now, I recognize that Arsenal had a fantastic week. In a single game week, once again, they had an absolutely fantastic haul with a lot of assets doing well. Gabriel, for example, Odegaard scoring, Martinelli scoring, Trossard having a super haul, Saka actually having a blank. But Jesus is coming back into the team, so that's going to create a little bit of issues, I would say, for those who own Martinelli and Trossard. Regardless, you also have the sporting game to think about, and the minutes that Saka seems to be playing seems to be hampering his ability to perform in the league. And also, if you just look at the fixture schedule, yes, Game Week 29 is fantastic for Arsenal. It's a single game week fixture versus Leeds, but is it that much better than some of the other doubles that we have in store, considering that 30, 31, 33, and 34 are really tough fixtures? Liverpool, West Ham away. Of course, West Ham have actually been a really terrible team this season, so that might not be as tough a fixture as we imagine. However, City is going to be a tough fixture for sure, and these are both away games at Anfield and also at City. So that's going to be those tough fixtures where I'd probably not want to actually own Arsenal defense in those weeks. And then with the Chelsea game, we have to see and assess whether Chelsea continue to build on the form that they've actually built and shown so far. And we get to see whether they perform well versus Arsenal. So that's going to be an interesting one because that's going to be at the Emirates. However, the only great fixture that you're really missing out on if you choose to, let's say, leave maybe 1 or 2 Arsenal defenders and midfielders off of your wildcard draft is Game Week 32. So I would recommend, if you plan on going for a free hit strategy on to actually use it on 32, get your Arsenal assets back this week and maybe think about going away from triple Arsenal on your wildcard draft. Yes, it's going to be a risk, but it should be one that pays off because you get Arsenal in the most important game in 32, and you still have probably 1 to 2 assets in Game Week 29, depending on what your risk tolerance is towards Arsenal. Anyways, let's actually head towards the first iteration of a wildcard draft. This is going to be a bench boost 29 draft with no free hit left. And the reason why we're going for Kepa and Pope is because both Kepa and Pope have good fixtures in bench boost 29. Yes, of course, everyone has one, I would say, tough double gaming fixture, but you can't win everything. It's the same thing as Brighton and Brentford, where they lost one of their clean sheets, but still inevitably had a good week overall. Even despite, for example, Brentford, a lot of people calling them out for having 2 away games, they still managed to bag a clean sheet. And that just simply shows you the strength of 2 fixtures. Newcastle and Chelsea have been some of the top defenses, particularly since Kepa has joined back into the team. And then Pope, of course, performing well all season, although notably getting a red card and almost another red card last week. So that's what's interesting to me. I think you have the opportunity to go for Kepa and Pope. But what you need to think about with your wildcard strategy is how much money you have in the bank. I can't dictate how much transfer value you have. You need to think about what the cost of taking Haaland out of your team is. So in my example, I actually took out Haaland in game week 15. So he costs 12.2 or 12.1 because of the price drop for me. So moving out of him and moving back into him is a little bit easier for me than most. Why I've recommended someone like Botman is because he's cheaper than Schär, so he should hopefully be someone who alleviates the transfer burden that is bringing back Haaland maybe at a more expensive price if you've never sold Haaland this season. Trippier for me is a must lock, so he's in the draft. And Gabriel and Zinchenko have also joined. The reason why is because both Gabriel and Zinchenko probably have the best matchup in this week in terms of securing a clean sheet in game week 28 versus Crystal Palace, a team that have struggled to score for the last 4 games. In fact, 0 shots on target 3 games in a row, and then the clean sheet that Brighton managed to get, even though Crystal Palace looked pretty lively in that game. Now you're actually playing at the Emirates. It's a much tougher fixture, and I'd actually prefer it towards Chilwell versus Everton. However, Chilwell, of course, is in our draft anyways, and clearly you can see that Reece James has not been selected in this draft. The reason why is because if you don't have a free hit, you need to circumvent the free hit blank for Chelsea in game week 32, so therefore it makes sense for me to only keep 2 out of 3 assets. Kepa has been a fantastic keeper all season, someone that I'm very happy to start, and as we said, of course, you have Pope for someone like WC28, and of course Trippier and Botman. If we move towards the midfield, Maddison is going to have the biggest asterisk here because we need to see what's going on with him from an injury point of view. It might be the case that he will be injured for a while. We need to get a little bit more of an assessment update from Rodgers, and you might want to change Maddison into another asset. So Buendia could be an interesting option. Going for maybe Almiron and then dropping one of the Newcastle defenders could make sense. You could also go for one of the Aston Villa assets like a Buendia as well. And you might even want to go for maybe a Bournemouth midfielder, but that seems to be a little bit left field, and that sort of locks you into a 3-4-3 structure. I think Maddison's close to being fully fit, and worst case scenario, you don't get a lot of minutes from Maddison in game week 28, but I think the upside in game week 29 is more than worth it. So you need to think about what this wildcard means for the rest of your season. Is Maddison on the bench boost someone that I would say is close to essential? I would say probably yes. Fernandes is someone who joins the draft, and as I said, with the logic of Haaland, you have players like Rashford, McAllister, and Fernandes here who all blank on game week 28. But the benefit of actually having them in your wildcard is you get those double game week fixtures immediately. And the whole idea of this structure here with Gabriel and Zinchenko is that you can transfer out one of Gabriel/Zinchenko into Estupiñán, who I think looked exceptional in game week 27. He's also just effectively been very, very good this season. The underlying stats do support him as being one of the top fullbacks in the league in creating effective chances. We're also seeing him totally cut inside versus defenses and take shots on target. So eventually he's going to score one of these goals if he's not offside. So we move on now towards the forwards. Dropping Haaland here, it means that we still need to have a lot of money in the bank, and therefore Solanke is that piece who anchors your team well because he plays 2 fixtures in game week 29, and it probably relieves the burden of dropping Haaland, of course, knowing that you have 3 fixtures at least. Now, Solanke is not a great option, but he's at a very, very cheap price, so that's kind of the benefit of him there. Kane and Watkins are your 2 options who I'd say I would still prefer Kane over Haaland. Maybe if you're a little bit scared of Haaland, then of course just keep Haaland in your team and drop Kane, but that doesn't make sense to me. Kane's got a great fixture himself, so Watkins is someone that I would love to target here simply because he's a great fixture run. And the reason why I prefer him over Havertz is exactly what I explained with the Chelsea situation in game week 32. Because you're actually going for a strategy without free hits, you need to make sure you navigate the blanks in the future, and you have no other options to navigate the blanks with if you're going to wildcard on this week. So therefore, Watkins makes a little bit more sense than Havertz. His numbers have actually been better. He's also on penalties, so there's no upside there from Havertz versus Watkins. And ultimately, I think Kane is just a much more clinical player, so he is worth that sort of cost upgrade in your team. And that's going to be the first strategy. The only change I would actually make if you are with no chips left is just simply go for Ward. You have no reason to actually play Ward because you're not going to really play him too often. You've got bench boost 29. Ward covers you in game week 32, and you have much more money in the bank to be a little bit more flexible with moves. Potentially, you could also go for another forward of your choice, but I would still recommend the same structure here because the loose plan is to, as I said, go out of one of the Arsenal defenders, keep 2 Arsenal players heading towards game week 29, and then bench boost with someone like Estupiñán in your team. So therefore going McAllister and Estupiñán to capture the Brighton doubles as well. And if we head towards the last strategy, which is going to be completely divergent to this, is bench boost 29, and free hit 32. So De Gea is actually someone who joins this draft. And because of free hit 32, you are now allowed to go for more United assets with a bit more comfort. It's the similar situation as Chelsea, where equally you can go for these Chelsea assets without fearing what your team could look like in 32, because you're just covering that team with 3 hit 32. So therefore, I would go for both James and Chilwell. Go for the upside there. Take the calculated gamble on game week 29 with James and Chilwell. Chilwell, of course, for me is the superior asset. So anytime you have to make a decision between the two of them, I would go for Chilwell, just because, yeah, there's a lot of concerns with James, and Chilwell has gotten a lot of minutes so far, so he might be rested, but we're also seeing him play left wing back all the time, whereas Cucurella is someone who seems to be able to slot into left center back. So I think that's the huge benefit there. And in terms of the attacking element, I think Cucurella is a huge downgrade compared to Chilwell when they play this back five structure, which Potter seems to have relied upon to finally get a little bit of stability from this Chelsea team. So there's going to be a huge drop in quality between Chilwell and Cucurella. So therefore, I feel like Chilwell is going to be quite secure in terms of minutes. It's a little bit different compared to James, who is continually struggling to stay fully fit, whereas with Chilwell so far, we've had no issues. Shaw is someone that I would recommend going for, because I feel like he has a little bit more of permanence in the team compared to Burn. But you can always go for Burn as well if you want to save a little bit of money, or you don't have the transfer value to meet the demands of this team. Once again, you need to think about, does this team structure allow you to get towards Haaland in game week 30? For most team structures, I've calculated that we probably have a transfer value of at least 101.5 million. So therefore, this would still make sense. But as I said, you can go for Burn instead. James and Chilwell worth the upside. Trippier and Botman, we understand they have a lot of double game week fixtures. We have the opportunity to bench boost on 29, which seems like a great opportunity to go for these Newcastle assets. Now, of course, triple defense is something that I think a lot of people don't like. So therefore, you can always go for an alternative, like maybe going for an Aston Villa defender, and then actually going for someone like Almiron, particularly if we get the news that someone like Maddison is still injured. So that's another option too, if you wanted to gamble upon a team like Newcastle in a different way, in a bit more of a diversified way. However, I still think this is the strongest structure. And then the midfield and the forward is actually exactly the same as the previous one. But just to reiterate the points, you've got Fernandes, McAllister, and Rashford. More fixtures than Haaland ultimately, so it's worth the cost, in my opinion, of actually sacrificing Haaland for 1 week and then actually tapping back into him in the week subsequent, or at least the week subsequent towards when he plays, which is going to be game week 30. Maddison and Saka, for me, both are worth the gamble, but Saka is a little bit nicer in the sense that I don't like the downgrade from Maddison to Barnes. If I didn't have the option of going for Maddison, I would simply just move elsewhere. I would go for a Bournemouth midfielder, an Aston Villa midfielder, maybe even Almiron, as mentioned. However, Saka is someone that you can quite easily side grade into Odegaard, because you've got the permanency of expected minutes there. What I would say about Odegaard compared to Martinelli is Martinelli seems to be the most interesting asset, but with Jesus finding his way back into this team for Arsenal, I feel like Martinelli will lose the benefit of being in the dangerous positions that he is, or at least so as frequently as he has this season. So we've seen a huge goal scoring rise from Martinelli in recent weeks, and that's simply due to the change in position of Nketiah being booted out of the team effectively, allowing Martinelli to play in this great role alongside Trossard, where they kind of alternate positions, but ultimately Martinelli is the one with the more forward positions. Once Jesus is integrated back into the team, which we can already see is happening, then I think Martinelli is not worth the gamble, and therefore one less risk on the wildcard means Saka and Odegaard are probably going to be better options. Rashford is non-negotiable, and then Solanke, Kane, and Watkins. People will say that this structure doesn't make sense. Solanke is one of the dead assets in the game, but I feel like Bournemouth, as of late, if you actually see their attacking numbers, they have risen steadily, potentially also because Utara is an interesting option, and also Billing might be preferred in the midfield. So if you don't really want to go for Maddison and you want to maybe upgrade on someone like Solanke, I can understand going for Havertz, but that means you might have to force a transfer down the line as well. So that's quite a tough situation. Iheanacho, I think, is a bit of a minutes gamble, which is why I prefer Maddison that much more. Now that we're seeing the Daka score versus Chelsea, and previously we were actually seeing that Daka was getting no minutes as a sort of substitute, we have the potential that Iheanacho could be rested or rotated in much earlier positions from a minutes point of view. So therefore, I think he's just too much of a risk to bear on Game Week 28 wildcard. And that's going to be the wildcard strategies for this week. There are going to be lots of differential options, but I feel like this is a good time to think about your Arsenal assets. That's where you should start formulating your thoughts, and therefore it should illustrate as well what your chip strategies are. If you don't want to free hit on 32, you want to keep these Arsenal assets in your team because you feel like they're so strong that they're capable of matching up teams like Liverpool and City and even Chelsea, then maybe look towards a free hit on 34 instead, and maybe look towards dropping some of the Chelsea or United assets that I've suggested. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys in my team selection video or the cheat sheet.